Welcome to Ctrl.Alt.thrive, where technology meet impact and purpose. I'm your host Navneet, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to very first episode of our newly rebranded podcast, previously known as the Femtech India. We are now evolving with much broader mission in collaboration with UNESCO Women for Ethical AI Network South Asian chapter. Ctrl.Alt.thrive is not just a name change; it's a bold new direction, a commitment to exploring how technology can truly thrive when it is ethical, inclusive, and designed with everyone in mind. What better way to kick off this journey than two remarkable leaders driving this mission forward? First, we have Eunsong Kim, Chief of Social and Human Science Sectors at UNESCO South Asian Regional Office, oversees Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. She leads initiatives promoting ethical, inclusive AI, aligned with human rights and gender equality, and advances youth empowerment, intercultural dialogue, and gender transformative engagement across governance, education, and industry in South Asia. Joining her is Dr. Bhavani Rao R., Dean of School of Social and Behavior Sciences at Amrita University, a leading Indian research institute. She holds India's UNESCO Chair on Gender Equality and Women Empowerment and directs Amachi Labs and Center of Women's Empowerment and Gender Equality. Dr. Rao is the chair of South Asian Chapter of Women for Ethical AI Network. In today's episode, we will explore the current state of ethics and gender equity consideration in AI and what UNESCO's Women for Ethical AI Network is doing to address this gap. Welcome to Ctrl.Alt.thrive with me, Navneet, and hi Eunsong and Bhavani. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Very good. Pretty good. They're with you.
Great. So I'll start with you, Bhavani. Tell me a little more about your background as person you are.
I'm a bit of an academic mutt, so I've studied all kinds of different topics, but my passion is really in women's empowerment and capacity building in rural India.
Amazing. And what about you, Eunsong?
Well, I grew up in different parts of the world. I'm Korean, but I grew up in the States. And then through work and UNESCO and UNICEF, I lived in France, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and now in India. So I'd say I'm an amalgamation of different cultures.
That's pretty interesting. And I think when we talk about, of course, ethical AI, and I want to start with basics. And Eunsong, I can start with you. From a global perspective, could you explain in simple terms what ethical AI really means? Also, how well is the tech industry doing with ensuring gender and ethical consideration across the AI value chain?
So ethical AI in simple terms, that's not an easy question, but let me try. Basically, it's ensuring that artificial intelligence and technologies are designed, developed, and deployed in a fair, safe, inclusive manner. And that means making sure that AI technologies respond to all our needs, that they're developed with everybody's inputs, everybody's data, but also in a participatory manner. Is it dealing with our data and personal data in a safe way? Do we know what's happening inside the algorithm, or are we just following some output? We call it the black box. So all of these, asking these questions, making sure that we have these answers, and in the end, making sure that technology is being used for humanity, not the other way around.
Right. No, I think that was a pretty good example of how you explain for someone probably who just doesn't know, right? So, Bhavani, as the chair of South Asian chapter of the network, could you please tell us about the network and how it promotes ethical and inclusive AI?
So the network itself is the brainchild of the UNESCO. So there is a multilateral organization that is really that is anchoring the entire effort. And in South Asia, you know that our area is a very fast growing sector, contributing tremendously to even the development of AI. And culturally, we're quite unique and we have our own nuanced cultural impacts. And so it is very important for us to have a South Asian voice in the whole AI and ethics conversation. And this is one of the main reasons why we work with UNESCO to start this chapter. To begin with, the chapter is Women for Ethical AI. So you already have that inclusive element. We are the other half of the population that wants to make sure that things are going right. So that is one of the biggest part. And second is the way the group is constituted, right? So you have, of course, the parent body, which is a multilateral organization. You have academics, you have CSOs, NGOs, you have industry, and you have the governments, the state governments and the central government that is involved in the network. So in that sense, it's also very inclusive that you have multiple voices that are coming in. Looking at it both top down and bottom up. So in that sense, it's quite inclusive. And being women, we're always going to watch out for everybody else. And I think that's probably the best way to get as inclusive as possible.
No, I think absolutely, I totally agree. And I also feel that all of us, like even when we look at women's health, we were just talking downstairs that nothing is actually designed for women. So women were not even part of the clinical trial. So it's all about how the world is evolving so fast. It has to be inclusive for everyone, right? Um,
Just to add that the network is also a group of women. All these women are contributing in their voluntary capacity. So these are really passionate women on top of their full-time jobs, taking time out to brainstorm together, really think of what we can do to make noise and make people pay attention on issues of ethical and inclusive AI.
no, that's really great.
So the agenda is humanitarian, not political, not anything else.
Yeah, no, totally. Also, I feel like you both work on ethical and inclusive AI in South Asia through policies and grassroots efforts. What are the most urgent steps needed right now to close the gender gap in AI, not just in number, but in real decision-making power?
I think the most important, from what we know from everything that we have, is that we don't have good gender disaggregated data. We don't have inclusive data. We don't have data on women.
Right.
We don't have contributing to that also development that is led by women. So we don't have even enough women in the technology space. These are some major areas what we need to focus on. Data security. There are multiple problems, but in terms of closing the gender gap, I think the most critical one will still rest in data and how data is being interpreted. I think that would be the most.
Right. Just to add on to it, I think there's an Einstein quote that says, like, if there's a problem that I have to solve, he said he would spend 55 minutes on understanding the question and 5 minutes in actually solving it. So I think that is also linked to the importance of data. If we don't have sex disaggregated data on all the issues around, whether it's the workforce, whether it's the design process of AI technologies, it's really difficult to understand what the problem is. We don't even know what the problem is. So then designing solutions to a problem that we don't know, it tends to be ad hoc and piecemeal. So I think in terms of policy or approaches for companies, this data is really a crucial element in understanding what the problem is. And probably that's why I completely agree with Bhavani on that. It's one of the most important things we should look at.
No, absolutely. And Eunsong, like if you look at UNESCO's recent report, right, shows that women are still greatly underrepresented in AI research and leadership. Why do you think this gap is still so big, even though more people are aware of AI?
I think the question of even though people are aware of AI is actually not true. I don't think, as in, even though people are aware of the fact that women are underrepresented in AI, I think is the question, which is not true. A lot of people still do not know that there's even a problem of underrepresentation in AI technologies of women and other genders and different ethnicities. We can go into the intersectionality issue of different caste, religion, ethnicity in this side of the world. And that's not, as much as we think it is a problem, it's well known, it's well documented, when we go out to the non-UN, non-development, non-academia group, a lot of people don't really see that as an issue and they don't even know that's a problem.
Right.
I'll give you an example. So right now we're doing the AI readiness assessment methodology in India and Sri Lanka and Maldives, 72 countries around the world. And as part of that, we do consultations in different parts of India, in different cities. And we go talk to industry people, startups, developers, students, you name it, different groups of people. And because we're rooted on AI ethics, we always have questions on inclusivity, on social diversity.
Right.
And it's really difficult to have that conversation because when we ask things like, do you think the AI ecosystem in this country needs to be more cognizant of different representation? People look at me like, what are you talking about? Like, why is that even an issue? Why is that a problem?
Right.
And then we go on to explain, well, if you don't have fully representative data or fully diverse teams,
Right.
you might not have a product that responds to everybody. And they're like, well, why is that an issue? I was like, well, there might be biases and stereotypes that might be exacerbated. It's like, well, our life and our society is full of biases anyway. Why is that a problem? So it is a good experience for someone like me who works in the UN, and usually we have this echo chamber where everybody talks about gender equity and equality and diversity. But when you step out, actually, not a lot of people know about it. And that's something I think organizations like UNESCO, UN really need to do a better job in having like really concrete case stories or research or data or stories in the form of digestible things that people can understand and really talk about these issues more, because actually not a lot of people know is what I've recently found out. Yeah.
I see a lot of organization and companies are talking about in leadership as well. And Bhavani, what's your point of view on that? Why do you still think that gap is there, even though we've evolving so much with technology, with overall world?
There are multiple reasons. The why is there's no simple answer. A lot has, in places like South Asia, which is why this network becomes very important. There are a lot of cultural underpinnings. Um, this is true actually for most part of the world, but also we have our own specific things. So, for example, like we discussed this afternoon, you could be very well educated. You could have done your master's in computer science or in program, whatever, in technology, but it doesn't translate necessarily to work in the technology areas. It could be because we're a patrilocal society. A woman studies in one place where she has access to studying and working in these fields, but she could get married and go to a place where she does not have the possibility. It happens a lot in biotech companies, for example. You have to have that kind of an environment to actually put your education to use. Work hours, safety, the compromise between your home and your work life, the demands on women would naturally anyway be more towards the home, especially if you decide to be a mother, and then you have additional responsibilities. And no matter what we do in terms of giving incentives or making concessions for women at work, it's going to be difficult, and there will always be a sacrifice either this way or that way. And that is one of the reasons. Those are the reasons why women tend not to translate necessarily their education. Going into STEM education itself has its own challenges, but even if you do, coming out and actually contributing in the space has like a million challenges. Yeah.
No, I think I absolutely kind of agree. Women prioritize families first. That's also another part of us as a being a woman, because there's emotional angle to it, right?
Not that it's wrong or not that it's right, but that's all something that you have to acknowledge.
Yeah. So Bhavani, you have done a lot of work at grassroots level, leveraging AI, robots, virtual reality, vocational training. So could you share a success story where immersive tech transformed a woman's life or community? Because your work is very much centered around communities, right?
Yes. I share the one that is, I think, closest to my heart, right? So this was a while ago when we first started working on technology and capacity building in women, we wanted to tackle uh, economic empowerment, but and vocational training, and using technology, but in non-traditional spaces. So we were based in Kerala. And if you know a little bit about Kerala, a lot of men go to the Gulf countries to work, and then they send money back home, and the women are left at home. So a lot of time you do not find access to good skilled labor within the state. And right now there's a lot of migration, so that's being filled by a lot of migrant workers. But when we first started, that gap had not yet been bridged. And so it was actually quite hard to get good skilled labor within the state because they would have all migrated.
Right.
And so we thought, okay, let's see how it works. Can technology really transform certain hardcore problems that we have, both societal and structural?
Right.
And so we built the first e-content, games, simulations, all in the plumbing trade. And we thought, okay, can we teach women to be plumbers? Because it was very hard to get a good plumber, which I think is true even today, but it's very hard to get good plumbers. And so it was very interesting because plumbing is technically, the caste association with it is quite stigmatized.
Right.
Even if you have vacancies and you can be taught plumbing for free, people don't take it up. Even in the vocational training centers, the plumbing seats are always not filled. People will go for other trades. There's a person, yes. So it's a low level, it's a low caste job. And so scavengers, plumbers are not necessarily respected. The profession is not respected. Funnily, it's not just true for India, but it's also true in the West. Yeah, people do not, even though it's very well paid.
Exactly.
It pays better than an engineer, actually.
Very well paid job.
Very well paid, but not
I
often.
haven't heard any women plumber.
So we wanted to see how we could transform that using technology. So yeah, so we did our first pilot with women, and this was in the year 2000 and maybe 10 or 11. And we trained India's first women plumbers, and they still work as plumbers. And what we found is that technology actually transformed. It suddenly did not become a low caste thing anymore because there was technology involved. You have to remember, this is before the days of the cell phone, the smartphone. It was still computers, and just tablets had just come into the system. So to sit on a computer and to learn how to use a computer just transformed the trade.
And then you gamified it.
And we gamified it, and it not just gamified it, we had to change the language that people use to teach plumbing because it's a very gendered language and kind of has a lot of connotations that are not so nice, that are gender based. So we had to kind of really change even to that level. We had to go
transformative language in plumbing.
in plumbing, which we did not expect. So you just ran into one problem after the other. And also, how do you bring technology to women in a very systematically so that it was not too much of a cognitive load on them. But then so that was one of the first interventions that we did, very successful. And then we took that to the next step. Then we dovetailed that into the Swachh Bharat mission, and we taught women to build toilets. So they learned masonry, plumbing, plastering, and yeah, they built toilets in their entire village. This is pretty good.
So that was in Kerala, right?
It started in Kerala, but then across 21 states.
Amazing. That is so empowering.
Was a very difficult but fun project.
Yeah. But that's what I feel like when you go to grassroots level within communities, like these are the changes you can bring with, like, its collaborative model is, I think, it's like a kind of future, I feel, right? Do you think so?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I work in that space. I think what is very important is that it builds empathy and also respect. When we work with women from rural communities, the first thing that you feel is tremendous respect for them. That in spite of what they had, the hardships that they undergo, they are far more resilient than people like us. They don't complain of a headache and not go to work. They can do so much more. It doesn't mean they don't suffer, but they are able to go through the suffering for good of that. I mean, that resilience is something that's completely it's phenomenal, and so you have deep respect, and you are able to relate and understand their problems from that, of course. So therefore, there's some compassion that also, I think, awakens in our heart, and
I just feel like this whole conversation about ethical AI really should be catalyzing and capturing a lot more of these kind of lived experience of
It's a
people
good example
and
of
women at the community level. But I mean, of course, we should be doing more, but even when the digital age came, um, and that led to the digital divide, which we're still clearly aware of. We're still trying to fill that gap. And now we have a more even powerful, huge technology coming in. And I feel like if we make the same kind of mistakes we did then, the structural issues not being changed,
right.
we will always be playing catch up with AI. And that's why I think, in the terms of ethical AI, having a participatory framework of making sure these kind of voices, the people you usually work with, are involved in the AI governance discussions, but also the AI technology discussions is something very, very important, but unfortunately not as easy. I mean, already at the AI global governance discussion, it's even difficult for the other countries, the so-called global majority, or these days you call it the global majority or the global south. They also rarely get a stake at the table. So we're not even going to the community level voices. But that's why I think the discussion of ethical AI has to be at every level, especially at this point where we're kicking off this discussion.
Yeah, and again, building on her point, when we talked about lack of gender disaggregated data, we're talking about women all over, but the rural voices are almost completely absent.
Right.
So it did not matter so much for technology that was not embedded in society, but with AI, and considering that we have a black box that we don't really know, any other technology, you can figure it out. But AI is the one bit that we don't really know what's going on inside. And the fact that so many people's voices are not being accounted for, it's not, we probably will never catch up.
Yeah, no, totally.
And just on that point, I think there's also a role of organizations like UNESCO or the UN. When we try to capture these voices, we can't use the same jargon and language because it doesn't translate. Like you said, you needed to change the whole language when you did the plumbing education.
Exactly.
We did certain consultations with different groups, and if we asked them, have you been engaging with AI technologies, nobody raised their hands. But if we say, like, have you played around with ChatGPT, then everybody raised.
Yeah.
So it's a really different. But then if you use the whole questionnaire that you've prepared with UN jargon and all these technology terms, people will not engage. So it's also, I think, a responsibility and role that we have to play. If we want to sufficiently and meaningfully engage with these people, we have to change the way we.
Yeah. And she's right about how people even define AI is different. And ChatGPT and these kind of ones where it's just conversational is taking off in a very big way. And that's built on large language models, which is basically the documented lived experiences of the entire world, in specifically the English speaking world. And so when you're talking about these many people whose lives and lived experiences haven't been documented,
Yeah.
what solutions is it going to offer you? Which direction is it going to take us? These are all big unanswered questions.
Yeah, I think ChatGPT is used broadly, like people are actually using it. Oh, it's my friend. I use for my business. I ask questions. I actually also spend a lot of time on ChatGPT, like honestly, because you're not able to think through. You're like, I can get something quick. Okay, just put it on ChatGPT. You get like 10 options. And that is becoming your practice every day. So we are like consuming more than I don't know, like where this is gonna go, but it's like a big question again. And I think that's why it's so important that ethics of when you're building in tech, and which many people just don't understand. Not many people have awareness as well. And I think on the same thing, I want to bring on my next question for you, Song, that um, what do you think that how important is it involving men and of course the young boys also in gender equality efforts, and what has been your approach? Because you work with a lot of youth empowerment, right?
Youth empowerment, but we also have a separate program called Transforming Mentalities,
Right.
which is engaging men and boys in the gender equality, equity discussion. Not only that, but unpacking gender equality with the lens of masculinities. So usually, unfortunately, in the development world, I think also historically, because women were in a more disadvantaged position, when we talk about gender equality and gender equity, it's usually around women and girls. But also, we need to recognize that there is this issue of masculinities. Men are also gendered beings. How are they engaging with societal pressure based on gender stereotypes? That discussion, unfortunately, is not as prominent. And that's what we're trying to do, because we think without that lens and without that discussion of masculinities, the debate and the research on gender equity is always going to be insufficient. And in that way, in ethics of AI as well, it is absolutely important, because a lot of the developers and the tech company leads are men and boys. And when I talk to programmers who are playing around with ChatGPT and all of these, they don't even consider ethics as a lens of, they don't even know what that means. So it's unfortunate. We are very cognizant that working with this as a big target group is very important. One thing we're doing, and this is beyond men and boys, but at UNESCO, when we talk to a lot of people and talk about ethics of AI, a lot of people are like, what does that even mean? How do I implement this? So what we're trying to do now is we're developing this massive online course that unpacks all of the 10 principles and the global recommendation of ethics of artificial intelligence. We talk about what that means. We give good case studies of how to implement that in your work. What are the trade-offs between different principles? And we're hoping to launch this in a couple of months, and it's going to be openly accessible to
It's free for everyone.
It's free for everyone.
Great. So I think similar question for you, Bhavani, as well. Like, how do you see the future of AI shaping opportunities for women and girls in South Asia and beyond?
So it's hard to predict what is going to happen. We know one thing, that technology is an amplifier. It amplifies a good story or a bad story. So it's important for us to get our stories right. So I know what we need to have in place so that we do not end up with the worst case scenario. If we know anything from the last few years on how technology has impacted our lives, we know that, like I was saying, mental health has taken a nosedive. If addiction to AI, basically outsourcing your capacity to think or discern, if that is outsourced, and if it is a better agent than you, then yes, maybe things will get better. I'm not saying human beings are the best in logical and critical thinking, but nevertheless, we have a society that keeps us in check, keeps us in order. And I think it's more not the individual thought process that actually helps us behave, but it's the social thought that kind of keeps us within our limits. Sometimes not, but mostly. I think what we need to have in place is what is critical. So to that extent, at the university, we've been looking at this actually fundamentally. What are we going to do? Because if you think about it, the school and the university system is what builds humans, right, along with your society and your family. But it's the time that you spend the most amount of time growing up, learning.
Your formative years.
And so it is a very critical role that we play in human development. And so this was something that we have all been discussing. So what is tomorrow going to look like with AI at our doorstep? And so what we have figured out is that the most important thing is to have a very strong value framework. We have to get our values right. We need to get our North Star in place. Is only when you know that this is where you have to head, you can constantly course correct. You'll never be completely on the spot, but you will have something to course correct towards. So education must be fundamentally based on human values. That's one of the first things that we have identified. The second thing that we have identified, of course, is mental health. Following closely on values is to have a strong sense of mind and ourselves in the context of not just us, but others and the environment. I think that is the second very critical step that we have identified. The third is to have that research bent of mind. So if you think about when you talk about research, it means scientific inquiry. It means the want and the urge to know. And with ChatGPT, it basically takes away your need to know. Before, you had information at your palm, in your palms, but now you have even knowledge in your palms, not just information, because it can even process your information for you. Then what is the need to think?
Right.
So the only reason you would think is because you want to know. So that has to come from inside. So that scientific bend of mind becomes super critical. So again, to have a very strong grounding in scientific inquiry too, with a research bent of mind, this has to come into our culture from school on, not even at college level. From the get-go, we need to have this in place on all these things. And the last, what we feel is super critical, is to have some kind of a social responsibility. It's not about me, mine, which can only be exacerbated with the way technology is. So like some kind of a way where we understand our role in the larger scheme of things and how we contribute to it. So maybe an SDG framework or something that basically governs on how we can give back to society. And we've kind of gleaned it from our university's 5 goals of education, where we realize that these are the critical points that we have to align all our education outcomes to.
I mean, just to build a couple of points on that. I mean, not just to say that AI is all a doomsday story, right? There's huge potential, and I honestly benefit so much from AI already. And going back to your point about why that scientific inquiry is so important, is if you know how to ask the right questions in the form of prompts, or even more, the kind of information and knowledge that you get access to in the tip of your fingers in a way quicker manner is so much more through AI. So imagine the gap that would come between students and young people and even adults who know how to do that and can use AI for their own benefits, and those who are not having access to all of that information. So I think that the gap becomes even more wider, and that's why in the universities or in other organizations, it is actually important to make sure that young people have that new skill of knowing what to use when asking what kind of questions exactly.
Super critical, because also like each question and each query to AI has a huge environmental cost and an energy cost. So then again, it's going to become super critical that you should be able to ask as precisely and as comprehensively as possible in just one. So that would become the most important skill set that somebody has to prepare.
And that's also one of the principles in the UNESCO Global Recommendation on Ethics of AI. One of the principles is proportionality. So when you use AI technologies, the question of is the output that I'm going to get from these AI technology, is it proportionate to the inputs? So if I'm going to do a calculation of 5 + 3, do I really need to use ChatGPT or AI? You can use a calculator or you can use your own brain. Now, even more complex issues, is it really AI technologies that has so much environmental cost? Is it really proportionate, or can you use Excel or different technology? So that's another, I think, very important consideration people need to have instead of putting in anything they want into the...
And that becomes our guideline to build on AI technologies.
So we were talking about global recommendation, of course, and can you tell us UNESCO promotes ethical of AI instrumentally of global recommendation on ethics of AI and other tools? How do you translate those high-level frameworks into locally resonate, actionable initiatives?
Very, very good question. I think to start off with, so the global recommendation on the ethics of AI is still the only existing normative instrument at a global level, which 193 member states of UNESCO agreed on what are the core values and principles of designing, deploying, developing AI technologies in an ethical way. And we're based on 4 core values, 10 principles, but at the essence of it, it's basically valuing human rights, human dignity, and fundamental freedom. That is very high level, right? What does that mean to all of us? So the next thing UNESCO did is making sure that these values and principles are tied to concrete policy areas. So we tie it to data protection, we tie it to gender equality. There's a separate chapter on gender equality, and we made a very deliberate decision to do that. We have an entire policy chapter on environment, and this was 2021, before the emergence of all these LLMs. So I would say it's quite visionary. And by doing it through all these 11 policy areas, we already give some indication to policymakers saying these are not just lofty values and principles, but these are concrete ways of how you can tie it in to the policy areas that you work in. That was the first step. The second step is what we developed something called the readiness assessment methodology. And that is essentially a diagnostic toolkit that we encourage member states to use. When you're about to dive into the whole area of ethics of AI, let's do a diagnostic on and understanding where your country is first, so that based on where your country is, you can identify the gaps, you can identify opportunities, and then let's develop the solution of different policies. So it's called the RAM, and that is critically to ensure that member states implement these principles into something that's concrete. And depending on the recommendation and the findings of each of the country reports of the RAM, we provide different types of support. We have things like the Women for Ethical AI Network, who's ready to support a lot of the implementation. We have something called the AI Ethics Experts Without Borders, where we deploy AI ethics experts around the world so that we can support a lot of the policy recommendations we do. We do a lot of capacity building, because that's also something that we've found over and over again when we do RAMs or when we talk to the governments. All of the governments across the world have been saying, we need capacity building. We need capacity building for policymakers to understand what AI is, AI literacy, what is AI ethics. So on top of the massive online course that we're developing, we do in-person trainings. So these are different ways that UNESCO puts in efforts to make sure that these high-level principles is translated into something more tangible in the ground.
No, that totally makes sense. So, Bhavani, this is for you. The AI market is expected to be worth over 1 trillion by 2028. What problems could happen if we don't fix the gender gap in AI leadership and innovation?
Oh, while I cannot predict the future, what I think our main concern is in terms of the gender gap and how it can be impacted by AI, is the fact that the biases that are there based on existing models that have been used to train these LLMs could just exacerbate any kind of, it just could get much worse. We know that these gaps exist because when you play around with AI, you face it, whether it's in terms of hiring, in terms of face recognition, in terms of the way it portrays or understands gendered roles. And the models that are there within AI have a gender bias, no doubt about it. I'm sure that the companies are trying to fix it, but at the end of the day, we don't really know how it's going to play itself out. To make sure that that is not the case, it is important for us to get, again, like I said, good amount of gender disaggregated data into your systems, to get the voices of women who are underrepresented in every which way, but they need to somehow make their way into the AI models. I think these are areas that we really need to work on.
Right.
Because the biases that loans that banks give or anything, startup capital and seed funding, whatever you're talking about, there's always been a systemic bias against women. And I speak about women because that's the group that I've worked the most with. And those probably will only exacerbate if we don't address this. And that's our biggest concern.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, Eunsong, what progress has made in implementing UNESCO's global recommendations on the ethics of AI in South Asia?
I'd say initially when we started off, we would approach governments in South Asia, explain that there's a thing called the Global Recommendation on the Ethics of AI, and the first reaction would be like, what is ethics of AI? But actually, thanks to the rise of ChatGPT, it became much more easier to talk about these issues. And in terms of progress, I would, counting the small gains, one thing is that we don't have to explain that concept so much anymore. People realize that there are clear dangers, and governments have to put guardrails in it. So that's in the aspect of awareness raising, I would say it's a gain. We're currently doing the readiness assessment in 3 countries in South Asia, with the Indian government, with Maldives and Bangladesh, and some plans to expand it in Sri Lanka. So it hasn't been always easy, but the fact that we have these governments on board thinking about these issues and working with us on the readiness assessment is, I think, a very big gain. We have plans to do a lot of capacity building, like I told you, which I think is a definite need in this area. And just in terms of the Indian government, they are one of the, I would say, leaders, definitely, not just the global south. Like a lot of countries that work in Europe also reach out to our office saying, we read about the India AI mission's competency framework on digital capacities. We would like to learn more. They reach out to us and say, like, in the AI mission, under the India AI mission, there's a safety and trust pillar on AI. That's fantastic. We want to know more. So I think India is quite, despite the huge challenge of making sure that AI responds to such a diverse set of population, it is quite ahead of the curve, and which is linked to the fact that they'll be hosting the next AI Impact Summit in February 2026. So very, very much looking forward to working with countries here in this region.
Of course, like if we are looking ahead in 2028, we've discussed that market is projected to surpass $1 trillion. What would a truly inclusive AI ecosystem will look like? Do we have answer?
It's a very complex system, and we don't really know how the technology is going to unfold itself, where its limits are. This is very unclear, and even the conversation, even among the experts, is quite divided. So the honest answer is that we don't really know.
Do you have something?
I would absolutely agree. I wouldn't act like I can predict the future, but yeah, I mean, ideally, there's things that I can wish for, but yeah, there's gonna have to be serious systemic structural changes for that to happen.
Absolutely. And of course, very, very important question that if you have a direct audience with tech CEOs or even VC ecosystem who are actually building and investing in AI, what would be your top 3 calls to actions to ensure more inclusive AI development for both of you?
To make sure that their data comes from unbiased sets, to make sure that their hiring practices are equal opportunity, and make sure that they have diverse working groups within their institutions. Yeah.
I mean, just on that point of equal opportunities, I think just saying that we've opened up the opportunity to everyone, male and female, and saying like, oh, but women never applied, or saying, oh, but it's because women don't have the capacities, that's why they're not on the top 10 list, is not enough.
Right.
I think you need to also think about, if that's the case, why is it over and over again that women are not applying to your positions, or women are not ending up in the top 10 system? Is there something wrong with the recruitment system, or is there more structural problems that lead to that? I think asking these questions as tech companies is very important, and especially for VCs, because they hold a lot of power in terms of funding, and that is very, very important in the direction of AI development. I would say, like what we discussed, Bhavani, change your funding styles. Fund in initiatives that can promote AI in an ethical manner. Fund in AI programs that are collecting data from indigenous languages. Fund startups that are investing in women's health. There's many, many different initiatives, and put the money there so that these can continue to inspire. And I think it also links to the whole SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Why don't VCs fund SDG impacts, or startups that focuses on SDG outcomes? that could be an excellent collaboration between the private and the public, the UN and the private sector. So that would be my call to the VCs.
No, I think I totally agree. Thank you so much. Um, the last question for our students, listeners, professional, anyone who just really new to this AI world, what's the one thing each of us can do today to help bridge the gender gap in AI? Like basic.
I think to be conscious of our own biases, and our biases can actually be it can be subconscious too, to really look at ourselves and see where our biases are and try to actively address the biases as they creep up in our everyday life, whether it's at work or it's at home. I think that would be a very easy, good place to start.
Absolutely. Questioning your unconscious bias, I think, is a great place to start. If you're a programmer, when you're coding, be cognizant. Maybe my unconscious biases are being reflected in the code that I'm developing. I was having a chat with a friend, and she's a high-level senior executive in a company, and we are discussing about something, and she said, if the chairman is X, Y, and Z, and I said chairperson, it's not always a chairman. And she's like, oh yeah, actually, I just say it as a habit.
Right.
And some people make fun of me, saying you're very sticky about ridiculous things. But even in our language, when we use it to children and chairman, chairperson, all of these, I think gendered languages can make a difference. So I think questioning your own biases and asking why always could be a very, very big contribution in your daily lives on bridging this gender digital divide.
Okay, great. So we're almost done. So can you briefly explain what is UNESCO Women for Ethical AI Network for South Asian chapter is?
So the Women for Ethical AI Network is a global group of fantastic women all over the world who really want to work, research, collaborate, brainstorm, raise awareness on the fact that we need more engagement of women in the AI ecosystem throughout the system. Now, the South Asia chapter is, of course, tied to the global network, but really focusing on issues that are rising here in this region, unique to women here, and really making sure that we have data, we have research, we identify issues that we want to collaborate on, give opportunities to younger women and girls in accessing AI. So it's a group of fantastic women in South Asia working on raising awareness of making inclusive AI.
Amazing.
And as the women, as we launched the chapter just very recently in January, as a part of the conference, International Conference on Gender and Technology, it's got the starting group of wonderful women that are coming together. So the main working areas are, of course, advocacy and policy. The second being research and innovation, and the third is basically impact at the grassroots. So these are the three major areas. So whether you're a practitioner, or you're from the industry, or you're the startup, or you're from the government who are looking more into the policy aspects of it, there is room for contribution for women from all these diverse groups. Like I mentioned, of course, people from NGO sectors, from industry, from academics, from government, multilateral organizations. We can work in this space without having to worry about any kind of political or ideological divide. Our focus is how can we make sure that the technology is used ethically and it can benefit everyone towards the STGs. I think that would be and we would be. India has, even just in terms of numbers, we have a lot of women who are in technology and a lot of women who will be probably excited to start new technology startups or work in the space of technology. And we would encourage them to surely sign up because it is individually driven. It is not. It's an organization of like-minded people who are contributing to the cause. So the more, the better. If you're interested in any of the work streams, you can please access the link that will be posted and join the network to whatever capacity that you wish to contribute on.
Yeah, so I was just going to ask that how someone can join. Of course, we'll add the links in the podcast. So it's open for pretty much everyone.
It means they can contribute to the level they want in different capacities. For example, right now it's a very relatively new network.
Right.
But under the policy work stream, one thing we did recently is the Telangana government is launching their AI procurement guidelines, and they reached out to us saying they want us to review it with a gender lens. So we provided our inputs. That's some of the things that we're looking into exploring the policy work stream. Under the research work stream, we talked about data a lot today. And we recognize that there are data gaps, especially data on women in South Asia.
Right.
So we want to do something like an outlook on gender and AI, documenting these gaps, documenting where the region is in terms of women in leadership positions, women studying these subjects. Maybe we don't have that data, but that's also a problem that we can identify. So that's another project or output that we're thinking under the second work stream. And the third work stream, we're still brainstorming, but we're thinking of mentorship schemes. We're thinking of the hackathon or the podcast that we're doing with you now. So just to say, this is probably just a start. Bhavani coming in, we have fantastic women in our network. We'd love for them to come on the show and talk a little bit more about what they're doing in their own lives.
That's amazing. That's wonderful. And you ladies are doing absolutely great work, smashing it. And I think these conversations are very critical. And you guys are actually building the foundations and also bringing more women to be part of it. So I'm sure we don't know the future yet, but I can definitely see that, of course, there will be an impact if we look back in 2028 or 2030 and we can say, yes, we were able to bring some sort of change for sure, right? So, congrats for doing all the work. And thank you so much for joining me today. It was so nice meeting you.
Thank you for having me.
Likewise.